or you can sell.
Sure. I will certainly say, like, when I have a slide for questions, and then you can help and then press the microphone or whatever you guys do.
Okay.
Right? Are we good?
I will moderate first.
Sure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Pycon Effects 2024 for tasting your session hosted in Nahdlatul Ulama University Yogyakarta. My name is Ali Pratama, and I will be your moderator for this session. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's event, Dima. He is a backend developer at Canonical. Today, we are fortunate to have them here at Pycon Effect, where he will be sharing insights on Don't Break Your Library. Please join me in welcoming Dima.
Thank you. Right. My name is Dima Tisnik. Title of my talk is Don't Break Your Library Users. I hereby agree to abide by Pycon APAC Code of Conduct and consent to being recorded and streamed. All right. Well, this is the last half an hour before the break. How are you guys feeling? Anybody tired? Okay. Well, you have a break soon, so let's power through. My name is Dima. You can find me as DMAQQ on GitHub, LinkedIn, well, everywhere else really. And I've been using Python since 2.4 versions. And by using, I mean that I ran it in production. In that case, it was embedded systems. And currently, I work for Canonical, which is relevant for this talk because Canonical is pretty big on long-term support releases. Which means that the libraries that I help maintain has to support Python 3.8 and above. Python 3.8 has reached the end of life early this month, but we still support it. Don't know if that's a good thing, but that's what we have to do. A little more about me, some fun facts. I live in Japan now. Before that, I lived in Singapore. Before that, in Poland. So, okay, what's weird about this picture? What is odd? Why are all the flags red and white? Yeah, well, obviously, when I realized that PyCon APAC will be held in Singapore, I had to come here. Add one more flag to my list. Okay, let's talk a little bit about trains. There is a train line here going to the airport, but of course it doesn't stop at the university, so I didn't take it, sorry. In Singapore, there is a train line, but no trains, because they can't agree with Malaysia. And then that leaves Poland and Japan. So what happens in Poland is that you come up to a level crossing, the boom is closed, a train passes, the boom opens, and then another train passes. That's not very safe. What happens in Japan? You come to a level crossing, the boom is closed, the train passes, the boom is still closed. 20 minutes later, the boom is still closed. There's a huge queue of cars, so somebody gets out of their car, and because they're construction workers, they take a saw and they saw off the boom and drive through. Obviously, police had a chat with that person. What I'm trying to get to is that we build software, and we try to be careful, but we can be sometimes not careful enough, and sometimes too careful. And sometimes we'll just work around our best intentions. Right, who uses PyPy? I want to see some hands. There are people who don't know what PyPy is? Okay, who uses requests? Okay, better, yes. Okay, who uses NumPy? Okay, who uses ops? Good, because that's the library I maintain, so I don't have to worry about you. Who uses packaging? So the thing is, you all use packaging, you just don't know it. You use a library to use another library that uses packaging. And if packaging breaks, you're not going to have a good day. Which means that when you think of a library, it's not only its direct users. There's like a whole cascade of people that depend on it. And it's not always even clear who those people are. All right. A little bit about this talk. I will talk about a few things that can break. Starting from most obvious to like least obvious. And in the end, I hope we have a little bit of time for questions and discussion. All right, is it good? Okay, so the runtime. So who thinks that the first change from ordering as like food string, quantity string to ordering with food string and quantity, sorry, an integer with a default, who thinks that that change is safe? Is it going to break anybody? You're not sure? Just the first arrow. Okay, maybe you're overthinking. It's supposed to be generally safe, but yes, there are cases when it's not if you inspect the function and you depend on its default values or something. Who think that the second change is safe, where you put a little asterisk in the middle, forcing quantity to be a keyword-only argument? Who thinks it is unsafe? Okay, I see some hands. Great. Yeah, that is generally considered unsafe. So I'm not going to stay too much here. They can't obviously also be making somebody. For example, if you use request library, somebody does like from requests.exceptions import something. Well, if you move things around and it's no longer in requests.exceptions, you're going to break them. But even if you're very careful, somebody else may have imported it from a different place, because within request you use these exceptions. So request.client or request.session might also have that exception. And your users might have accidentally gotten it from the wrong place. I think it's actually a real thing that happened. Custom types, if you have them, obviously when you change them, you don't know how your users use your custom types. Arguments, which we've covered in the previous slide. Arguments have also values, and when you change the expectation of on the range of the values an argument can take, that is a real easy way to break stuff. But there are more, of course. There are callbacks. The good thing about that is that you need to learn your computer science, which is, I hope, why you're here. You got to know what covariant and contravariant mean. Don't ask me. I'm not a professor. But if you're going to maintain something that has callbacks, you better learn it. To put it like simply, invariant, it means exactly same type. Covariant means one side is wider. Contravariant means one side is narrower. And there is also bivariant, which we don't use in Python, so you don't have to learn that one. But if you use JavaScript, they have bivariant types. You can have type signatures if you change them, depending how you change them. Okay, last one, doc strings. Who thinks that changing doc strings, that just has to be safe, right? Yeah, who thinks that changing doc strings is somehow unsafe? Anyone? Well, if you use FastAPI, your doc strings end up in the schema, OpenAPI schema or Swagger schema that is generated. So even if you make a library that is then used by somebody in FastAPI, depending on obviously what you do, but if they export it, then your doc string ends up in somebody's schema in another system. And so whenever you change the doc string, there is a cascading effect. Now, hopefully, it's just a description without any meaning in it. But it did happen in NumPy, I believe, that NumPy's doc string used to be plain strings and changed them to RST, restructured text. And a bunch of tools that relied on showing you in your IDE what you're trying to do suddenly stopped working. So weirdly, even doc strings can break. Changing doc strings can break stuff. What does it mean? Basically, anything you change can break stuff. So what? Never change anything? Like, what do you do? I would put it this way, that you are bound to break a hypothetical user. There's always going to be somebody somewhere who uses things in a really strange way, but that's okay as long as you pay enough attention, right? So it's okay if you're breaking 0.1% of the users or something, right? Just maybe not too often. All right, so let's have some practice. This is our food cart, and you can order bakso or bakmi, otherwise you get a value error, and you can order a certain amount of it. So then you notice that, well, most of your users, what they do is they order explicitly bakso, right? And typically like weird quantity like 42. So we figure, well, why don't we just change that to food being a literal, either bakso or bakmi? they would have a very clear expectation. Their VS Code will show them. So who thinks this is safe? Who thinks it's unsafe? Okay, I'm just going to open the stage. Why may it be safe or unsafe? Any ideas?
I think it would be unsafe because literal can contain other data types maybe.
Okay, that's not what I was getting into, but I guess you have a point there. Other ideas? Okay, this is actually something we tried to do in our library, and we got burnt. The real issue is that literal is not a value. Let's get the next one. So let's say somebody stores their food orders in a JSON, right? Or gets it through from the front end to the back end, and they even make sure that food is a string. With the new thing, it's going to break because your static type checker doesn't know what food is. So you're going to be, okay, fine. I will make sure the food is either Baxo and Bakmi. And the static type checker is still unhappy. Why is that? So the thing is that literally means literal, as in it's written in your code. Quotes Baxo, quotes Bakmi. It doesn't mean that it is an object that happens to have a value Baxo. Those are different things. And to illustrate this point, if you wanted to make this code safe, you'd have to go like this. If food equals Baxo, order Baxo, literal. If food happens to be Bakmi, order Bakmi. The thing is, food can be something other than a string that equals Baxo. But that's not a literal Baxo, right? You could have your own type that behaves like a string. So I would say don't use literals in public APIs, please, unless you just really, really have to. They exist for a reason, and the reason is that Python standard library has a bunch of functions that behave differently depending on what kind of argument you give it. For example, when you open a file, you can open it for reading and writing, you can open it as text or bytes, and there you get this interesting thing that depending on what the value of the argument is, you'll get a different type of the return, right? If you open a file as bytes, you're going to read bytes. If you open it as text, you're going to get strings. Yeah, I'm not smart enough to really understand the thinking behind it. I just rather stay away from literals. Okay, let's do something simple. Let's say you want to change food from accepting only strings to accepting strings or bytes. Surely this is safe, right? Okay, and can anybody say that it is safe? Is anybody certain this is safe? Is anybody certain it's unsafe? Okay, I don't know everything, but this is what happens in reality. There is somebody who has tests. And since they don't understand your libraries, they just create a mock version. And their mock version already has a function, order, which accepts a string. Now, the parent class is changed to accept strings or bytes, and the mock class is no longer compatible. It's fine at runtime, but your static type checker is going to scream at you. And sometimes it's going to scream at you in a way that is like, what does it even mean? Like, especially if you don't have the code of the parent class visible. Ultimately, the meaning is that the subclass has to be usable in any place where the parent class is. So some other place in code that accepts varung should be able to take mock varung and work just as well. But if mock varung cannot accept bytes in here, then all right. Now this is code that exists in the repositories that I maintain. Sorry, not my repository, but the repository people who use my library. And it looks like this. First time I saw it, obviously I compressed it. It was like 100 lines. I was like, what the hell is going on here? Okay, who has an idea why this code exists? Open the floor. Show me, give me any idea. A silly one.
Maybe different version behave differently.
Okay, that's you're getting there. But surely the person who wrote this code knows what Pydantic they use. Is it Pydantic 1.x or 2.x? And the child knows. Okay, I'll show you. The thing is, your library is a part of a bigger thing. There are other libraries. What happens when there is an application that uses a bunch of libraries and several of them use Pydantic? Pydantic switched to Pydantic 1 to Pydantic 2 with a bunch of incompatible changes. Who gets to go first? Is it realistic to expect every single library in the world that relies on Pydantic to issue a new version at the same time? Not really. And also, even if they did, it would be really hard to test. So you end up with a shim like this that one of the libraries can support one or two, whichever happens to be there. And because Pydantic is sufficiently different between version 1 and 2, you end up with this code. Now, the validator, I abbreviated here, it's relatively straightforward. And there's even an open source project, Pydantic Compat or something like this, which does this for you. However, there are things in Pydantic that has changed. I'm not sure off the top of my head if you can make this shim for every little thing that Pydantic does. What I would say about this is that eventually, sooner or later, we got to move, let's say, from Python 2 to Python 3, right? We got to move from, what do you have, eventlets to async IO. So you will have to run changes. And then maybe the right thing is to announce them early enough, provide sufficient documentation, tell people how to migrate their code so they don't have to invent this themselves time after time. All right. Now, now I want to speak more about high-level things. So I am lucky. I live in the captive environment. Most people who use my library work for the same company, so I can force them to do stuff. I can force them to change the code. Then there is open source, when there are a lot of people, but you can find their code on GitHub, mostly. Please keep your code on GitHub and not somewhere else. And then you can see their code. So you can see what they do with your library. And then there are cases where somebody proprietary, like somebody who works for a bank, uses a library, and you don't know they do. Is it one person or 100? And when they complain, it's already too late. So I would say if you're being paid to do it, obviously you want to support as much as you can. But if you're not being paid for it, just forget about them. Forget the proprietary people. Think about them, but in the end, you have to make a decision in the interest of the majority, I guess. All right. Next one is, okay, so you have your users in your company or GitHub. You want to know what they do. You want to understand why they use your library. You had some idea when you wrote your library, but they may have a different idea. So what we do in our team is we run their tests. We have 160 repositories. We have them all checked out, run it against a branch, like a different version of our library. Then the next thing is to really run the tests, because they can have unit tests. They have static tests. They have linters. They have integration tests. So you want to run all of the tests, and you want to make sure you understand what they're doing, not just run it, but also understand it a little bit. And then you may want to run tests for all the releases, because what they have in their master branch or main branch may not be what they're relying on. They may support other releases, may have stuff in production. Likewise, you may have a thing where the newer code would use your older version of the library, or their older code who is a newer version of the library. So there is a bit of a matrix going on. Don't go too crazy. As long as you just do maybe two or three sets of versions, it should be fine. Conceptual advice. We as developers often make choices. Well, we have to make choices every day, every minute, frankly. And we tend to do it as developers. And really need to start thinking a little bit like our users do. Not all of our users are developers. Some have different roles. But also, more importantly, they have a real problem to solve. My library just does some random stuff, and they have a real problem. And then sometimes you don't have enough users, so you don't get any feedback about your changes. Okay, just keep making your changes. And sometimes there are really many users and you just cannot change anything. Just fork your library. Deploy it on a different name. That's fine. All right, conceptual advice. So our CTO has this idea of minimize future regret. What I would put about it is like, you have a choice. You can go with API A or API B. So think how hard it would be changed from A to B or from B to A. Obviously, the user's cost, not your own. Your time doesn't matter as much. Your user's time is a lot more, right? And then take the path so that going back would be easier. That will be very, very good for you later. Okay, some practical advice. Stop writing classes. If you haven't seen this talk, please watch it. It's great. You should almost never have classes in Python, especially in public API. Don't use plain enums. str enums are okay. Plain enums, everybody gets them wrong. The real problem with enums is that if you export enum as a part of a public API and your user uses two libraries, what does your enum mean for the other library? It doesn't understand it. It means you're forcing your users to always translate your enum into somebody else's enum. That's crazy. You want to have clear public types. I guess it's obvious. Hide the internals. I think this is an important one because you have a lot of code. You want to keep your public API as small as possible and clearly separate what is internal. Maybe you put your functions with an underscore. Maybe you have modules with an underscore, whatever. I would say avoid literals, just same as enums. They are not there for what you think they are. They are not constants. They are literals. There's a difference. And mostly prefer std types, because if you use a standard library type, it means that every other library can use it. Oh, but hypothetically, obviously. If you use a custom type, then you're guaranteed that other libraries don't know what to do with it. All right, some extras. How to version your library. There is zero ver, there's semantic ver, there's calendar versioning. I would say zero ver, please don't use it. Just please don't. In Python, it's almost okay, but by the time you get to 0.57.14, it's surely it is stable enough. And in JavaScript, the selector will not do what you think it does, so like it's totally rubbish. And if you have a version like 0.4.0, well, is it meaningful at all? Like it's only the fourth version of this library ever. A semantic version is kind of good. It's standard. Most popular libraries use it. But sometimes it gets a little crazy, like 75.2.0. There were 75 breaking changes? Really? Or 1.35.47. There were 47 micro releases. They didn't break anything. I don't believe you. Now, cover sits somewhere in between. The good thing about cover is just by looking at the versions, you can see if something is terribly outdated. In this set, it's pretty fresh. If you see 2019, well, yeah, that's bad. In semantic version, you don't know. You actually have to go and check. If you have a simple library, cover is great. But how you pick between the two I'll leave that up to you. Not really a big issue. Okay, some anecdote. So this is Stu Feldman. He's the author of Make. Anybody use Makefile? Why is there a tab in Makefile? When he started writing it, it was convenient for whatever reason. And so he had to stick with it because he had a bunch of people who had already used his thing. Everybody was asking, can you switch to spaces, please? And he's like, no, but there are these users that use it, which were a dozen. And now, of course, there are like millions of us struggling with this thing every single day. It's true that most of your libraries will not be so popular, but maybe it's good to break things on purpose at least sometimes so that your library is actually more usable. So don't take anything I said as a hard rule, please. And I shall open the floor to questions. You can ask me about trains if you want. Go ahead. Okay, there is a very famous talk. You can find it on YouTube. It's called Stop Writing Classes. Just watch it. There's like 40 reasons why. Yes? Right, yes. It helps if you know your users in a wider sense. So one user is asking for this thing, and then you'll be able to say, well, maybe it affects 5% of users, maybe it affects everybody. Are they asking it because it's convenient for them, or are they asking it because it's actually useful for everybody. So that helps. Otherwise, you're just picking blind. But in the end, I think sometimes, even if they have a very good idea, it's important to say no. At least sometimes, right? Because your library does a certain thing. You don't want it to suddenly be doing something completely different. Start writing your library in that case, right? Sometimes a request like this is best solved by adding half a page in your documentation. Like, if you want to integrate with Google, please do this. Like, I'm not going to integrate it for you, but just you can do that. For example, right? There are many, many different ways. I can only cover a few. We can also talk maybe after this presentation. Other questions? Yes, go ahead.
There's a slide we got that talks about the proprietary users.
Yes. How do you deal with proprietary users? Frank answer, I don't know. Less a frank answer, you ask them for a minimum reproducible example when they run into a problem. In some cases, you go to a conference and you present, and people come and talk to you, and it's like, oh, I'm using this for X and Y. Like, oh, wow, X and Y. I never thought of that one. But it is hard. Basically, they are kind of invisible, really. I think community is more than just what you see on a computer. I think maybe that's the important one. All right, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for answering the question and insightful presentation. And with insightful talks, we hope you find it insightful. We encourage you to continue exploring Python in your project. And a big thank you to everyone who participated today. Have a great day, and please wait for another session after this. Thank you.